In the summer of 1994, Kara Hollis finished her shift at 10 o'clock at night at the small shop near Park Central Square, Springfield, and stepped onto the stretch of road less than 500 meters long that she had walked hundreds of times before. 12 minutes later, her purse was last seen on the camera of a neighboring store, while Kara vanished. No direct witnesses, no screams for help, no distress calls, only a 38-minute gap that no one could explain. Her family was told that Kara had probably left Springfield to start a new life, while town rumors spoke of a strange man who often parked a silver pickup near the square. Then, in 2025, a dusty evidence box in storage was opened, and what was inside forced the entire city to confront the truth that someone had been watching Kara longer than anyone ever imagined and had waited 31 years for their secret to rise from the shadows. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The summer of 2094 in Springfield, Missouri, passed in thick, humid air, with evenings draped in a thin mist, floating under the old yellow streetlights, giving the whole Park Central Square area a feeling that was both peaceful and unsettling, as if the city was trying to warn of something no one could yet predict. The night Kara Hollis disappeared was just such a night. A light breeze moved through the rows of trees, the pavement still streaked with water after the rain, distant car sounds fading into the silence of the city center. Kara, 27 years old, finished her late shift at the small store where she worked, pulled down the glass door with a familiar motion, locked it, and stepped out onto the quiet square. The weak streetlights stretched her shadow long across the wet sidewalk, each step sounding soft as if melting into the night. A few people who passed by later recalled seeing a young woman walking through the neighborhood, but their memories were like scattered shards of glass. One said they saw her cross the north turn, another remembered her standing under an awning to avoid the rain, and someone else only caught a glimpse of a female figure hurrying past without being sure it was Kara. No one could describe exactly the last moment they saw her. Kara, as usual, followed her familiar route toward the parking lot, purse slung crossbody over her shoulder, walking calmly, unhurried, showing no signs of anything unusual. It was just a short distance, well lit enough, familiar enough that no one thought it could be the last path anyone would see her on. But after her figure blended into the patchy light at the corner and disappeared around the usual turn, Kara never reappeared. As the night deepened, and too much time passed without any word, her family began to worry. The phone rang and rang with no answer. They went out searching around the neighborhood, asking neighbors, calling acquaintances, checking if anyone had seen her. Every answer was the same. No one had seen her since she left the store. The tension kept building, the sense that something was wrong growing clearer by the minute. By the time it was well past midnight, and Kara still hadn't come home, the family had to face the fear they had been trying to push away. They called the police to report that Kara Hollis had gone missing. From that moment on, Kara was no longer just someone who was late coming home. She officially became a missing person case in the heart of Springfield. Right after receiving the missing person report, the Springfield police began following standard procedure for locating a missing individual in an urban environment, reconstructing the last known route based on geographic data, witness accounts, and surrounding spatial factors around Park Central Square. No emotion, no subjective assumptions, just the core question being asked. Where could an adult disappear on a stretch of road less than 500 meters long? That was the distance from the store where Kara left to the parking lot, where she usually parked. A path so short that if anything unusual happened, it would have to occur within a matter of seconds. The investigative team immediately deployed personnel to map out 3 possible routes Kara might have taken. The first route was the well-lit one, running along the front of the square, where late-night restaurants were still open on both sides and the streetlights worked properly. This was rated as the least likely route, because if Kara had gone this way, the chances of witnesses seeing her entire journey would have been much higher, yet no one among the late-night customers or cleaning staff reported anything unusual. The second route was the stairway leading down to the parking lot, mostly below street level, with dim lighting and many blind spots. This was the route Kara usually took on late shift nights, and because of the high level of concealment, it was considered the route most likely for a forced approach to occur. The third route was through the row of closed shops, running behind a series of darkened storefronts where darkness dominated and very few people passed after 9 o'clock at night. If Kara chose this route to avoid the rain, or to shorten the distance, then within a matter of seconds at any blind spot, the possibility of being approached without witnesses was entirely feasible. 3 investigative groups were assigned to sweep simultaneously. They walked the routes Kara could have taken within the reported time frame, marking every dark spot, every recessed doorway, every back entrance of nearby shops. This was critical because enclosed, out-of-sight spaces were the most likely locations for an abduction to occur. During the route reconstruction, the police began cross-referencing the witness statements from the initial missing person report. However, the statements immediately created a problem. They contradicted each other significantly. One person said they saw Kara heading north, another insisted she was going south, while one statement claimed she stood under an awning to avoid the rain before turning onto the road beside the square. A misplacement of just a few dozen meters could change the entire direction of the investigation, because if Kara turned left instead of right, the person who approached her could be someone entirely different. After screening, the police concluded that the witness statements could not be used to determine Kara's exact direction of travel. When the statements were plotted onto the map, they did not form a continuous path. Instead, they looked like unrelated segments, each suggesting Kara appeared in a different location during the same time frame. This led to only 2 reasonable possibilities. One, Kara had changed direction very quickly due to an unexpected factor, or 2, Kara had not even finished the route before being intercepted right after leaving the store. With such a short distance, being approached, blocked, or forced into a concealed area would take only seconds. This was the investigative team's first assessment. The disappearance happened almost immediately after Kara stepped out of the lit area, before she could reach a more populated zone. To strengthen the hypothesis, the police conducted a detailed survey of every blind spot along the 3 routes. Unlocked back doors, narrow alleys just wide enough for one person, stairways down to the parking lot, where light didn't reach, all were checked. These locations could all have been places where Kara was subdued without drawing attention. At this point, the investigation shifted from gathering information to identifying the first point of loss, the spot where Kara's journey was interrupted. This was a crucial step, because without finding the point of loss, the entire search process would drift into vague speculation. The investigative pace accelerated. The field team stayed on to sweep every square meter. The behavioral analysis team began considering intervention possibilities based on terrain, and another group continued verifying witness statements to find overlaps in the descriptions. Each route was narrowed down. Every dark area was marked, until the police determined that Kara was most likely intercepted in one of 2 areas: the stairway down to the parking lot, the place with the least light, or the alley behind the row of shops, where no one would have seen. These 2 locations became the focus of the entire initial phase of the investigation. The morning after, as the first daylight touched the rows of buildings around Park Central Square, the investigative team began the expanded search phase. A necessary step after the route reconstruction showed that Kara was most likely intercepted abruptly. However, just as the forces were focusing on the 2 key locations near the square, unexpected information came in from the outer search group, an indirect piece of evidence, found in an area about 1.5 kilometers from where Kara left the store. It wasn't a direct identifying item like personal belongings, but a small detail, a crumpled piece of paper that had been stepped on and soaked in rainwater, yet bearing markings similar to the type of receipt used daily at the store where Kara worked. The piece of paper carried no information about Kara, but the timing and location of its appearance raised a big question. Why would an item specific to the store be lying in an area so far from the center, right at the time Kara disappeared? It was impossible to draw any conclusions from a single isolated piece of evidence, but it was enough to break the initial geographic boundaries of the investigation. The field team leader proposed expanding the search radius from a few hundred meters to 3 kilometers, encompassing all the routes leading out from the central area. The 1994 map of Springfield was spread out on the table, marking the logical directions of travel if someone wanted to take Kara away from the Park Central Square area without being noticed. The field police team began dividing the area into 3 rings. The inner ring was the zone around the square. The middle ring included the roads leading to the park and nearby residential areas, and the outer ring reached the small industrial zone and the sparsely used parking lots at night. The appearance of the receipt fragment forced the police to consider an important issue. Did Kara leave the area of her own volition, or was she forced? If Kara had walked away on her own, it would have been difficult for her to cover such a distance in such a short time. But if a vehicle was involved, whether Kara's own car or someone else's, then getting her out of the central area would take only a few minutes. This was why the investigative team had to shift to evaluating the possibility that Kara had been forced to move. They analyzed the speed, route, and traffic conditions that night. Low traffic volume, slippery roads from light rain, but enough light for a vehicle to stop briefly without drawing attention. From analyses of similar criminal behaviors, the police determined that if Kara had been forced into a vehicle right near her workplace, the perpetrator would choose a linear escape route with few turns, prioritizing areas with fewer cameras. In 1994, a time when urban surveillance systems were not yet developed. Also during the outer ring sweep, another group found a second indirect sign, fresh tire tracks pressed into a patch of mud at an empty lot. The location showed no signs of a struggle, but what was noteworthy was that the type of mud clinging to the tire tracks matched the mud recovered from the floor mat of Kara's car during the initial examination. This was not yet conclusive evidence, but it aligned with what the investigative team had already suspected. Kara's car, or a related vehicle, may have passed through this area on the night she disappeared. From this, a new suspicious route was identified, the second route, running along the east-southeast axis of the square area, passing through secondary parking lots, and connecting to a dimly lit residential zone. This route coincided with the location where the evidence was found, and lay on the axis that the perpetrator could have chosen if they wanted to take Kara out of Park Central Square without passing through brighter streets. The investigative team marked the entire route for re-examination of back doors, stopping points, tire tracks, drag marks, or any signs of forced movement. The results showed that this route had many characteristics fitting short-term abduction behavior: numerous spots hidden from the main road's view, distances between light sources just enough to see general shapes, but not clearly identify faces or license plates, and most importantly, it led directly to the vacant lot where the tire tracks were found. After compiling the new data, the police reached a preliminary but pivotal conclusion: Kara did not leave the central area of her own accord. If she had left willingly, leaving behind evidence made of material specific to her workplace in such a distant location would be illogical. Moreover, the coincidental match between the evidence location, the suspicious route, and the mud type in the car made the hypothesis of Kara being forced to move much clearer. In particular, the time from when Kara left the store until her family realized she was missing was too short for a free journey longer than 1 kilometer to have taken place, even if she had intended to go somewhere without telling anyone in advance. With a series of converging facts, the investigative team officially narrowed the focus to forced movement behavior. This changed the entire nature of the case. From a disappearance with no clear cause, it began to show clear signs of a deliberate abduction. The newly identified areas were marked with reflective stakes, so the search team could continue expanding and turning over every meter of ground, every ditch, every remote parking lot. From here, the focus of the investigation shifted from the question, "Where did Kara go?" to a far more urgent and difficult one: who took Kara, and how? That afternoon, the same day as the search teams had fanned out across the outer ring routes, a call from a resident on East Chestnut Street prompted the command center to immediately dispatch a patrol unit to check it out. The caller reported that a strange vehicle had been parked in front of their house since the previous night, unmoved, with no one coming to claim it, and this was completely out of the ordinary for a quiet residential neighborhood where residents knew each other by sight and rarely had transient vehicles parked overnight. When the patrol unit arrived and verified the license plate, there was no doubt left: the vehicle was Kara Hollis's car. The information was relayed straight to the lead commander, and the surrounding area was cordoned off within minutes to prevent civilians from accidentally disturbing the scene. The first impression the investigative team had upon approaching the car was how illogical the parking spot was. The small street, with only occasional vehicles passing by, was not on Kara's usual route home from work. Investigators reviewed her personal records and confirmed that Kara had no friends, acquaintances, or personal activities connecting her to this area. The location was too far from her known connections, yet too close to be considered purely random. This made the possibility that Kara had driven here herself almost zero. The car was parked at a very neat angle, perfectly aligned, wheels straight, not crooked, a detail indicating the driver had enough time to adjust the vehicle into position, rather than stopping in a hurry under panic. If Kara had been in an emergency situation, parking so precisely like that would have been highly unlikely. Conversely, if the car was driven by someone under no pressure, or someone wanting the vehicle to look as normal as possible, then this style of parking made perfect sense. The glass surfaces and hood showed a thin layer of dust that had not been greatly disturbed, except for a small area near the driver's side door handle, where the condensation pattern was uneven. Investigators inferred that the door may have been opened briefly after the car arrived here, then closed right away. There were no signs of forceful yanking, prying, or scuffing on the metal surfaces, meaning whoever accessed the car had the key, or had full control of the vehicle at that moment. Residents were asked about any lights or engine noises the night before, but no one recalled anything noteworthy. This fit the assumption that the perpetrator had chosen a late enough time for the trip to be silent, short, and without drawing attention. The narrow street structure, open spaces, and quietness meant any conspicuous action would have been easily noticed, but a brief stop lasting just seconds could easily go unobserved. The field technical team began the process of photographing and documenting the car's position. Near the right front wheel, a small streak of mud, mixed with grit, had accumulated. The color and texture matched the sample taken from the vacant lot that the search team had previously swept. Although it could not yet be conclusive, this detail was enough to draw the investigators' attention. The car's journey passing through multiple locations on the night Kara disappeared was entirely plausible. On the road surface around the car, some shoe prints were visible due to the slightly damp ground, but they were not sharp enough to identify the shoe type or size. However, the shoe prints were concentrated more toward the driver's side than the other, reinforcing the hypothesis that only one person stepped out of the car after it was parked. Before opening the car door, the forensics team checked the lock for signs of tampering. The results showed the lock intact, with no evidence of forceful impact. This meant the driver used the real key, a detail that forced the investigative team to consider the possibility that Kara had her keys taken from her in the moment of interception. Someone with the key wouldn't need to rush. They could park the car calmly, at the right angle, and leave the scene without creating any chaos. Using ultraviolet light, forensic specialists noted faint reflective areas on the door handle and the edge of the door frame. These could be traces of natural hand oils or from gloves that had contacted the surface. The reflective areas were too faint for immediate analysis, but they were marked and sampled for later testing. No one detected any unusual odors like strong cleaning agents, which suggested that if the perpetrator tried to erase traces, they had done so in a way that left no obvious signs, or simply that they were confident their actions wouldn't be traced back. Once the outer perimeter sweep was complete, the police proceeded to open the car door. The door opened lightly, without any creaking, indicating the vehicle hadn't been abandoned for long. Inside, the driver's seat was adjusted farther back than the position Kara usually used, a detail later confirmed by her family. This increased the likelihood that the driver was a man, or at least someone taller and of a different build than Kara. The rearview mirror had also been readjusted, A small but extremely important detail in a missing person case: no one adjusts the mirror when under stress or being forced. Only someone driving voluntarily would do that. These elements pieced together formed a clearer picture. The car wasn't abandoned randomly, but placed in a specific position to make it look like a normal overnight parked vehicle. The driver wasn't in a hurry, wasn't afraid of being seen, and likely understood the characteristics of this neighborhood well. A place where everything stayed quiet, where a strange car wouldn't draw immediate attention, but also wasn't so far out as to seem suspicious. Once the interior had been marked and prepared for detailed analysis, the field commander gave a temporary assessment. The car was part of a plan, not an incidental breakdown. And from that, an urgent question took shape. If the mastermind had brought the car here to conceal their actions, then how did they leave this residential area, and where was Kara at that moment? The car's interior was sealed and transferred to the forensics center that very night, because this was the last space where Kara could possibly have been before she vanished. Every procedure was carried out to the standard of a suspected abduction case. Doors sealed shut, anti-contamination covers installed around the handles, cameras recording every angle, and only an authorized group of investigators allowed access. When the cold, sharp white lights of the lab shone directly onto the car's interior, the first details began to emerge, details that could not be fully seen with the naked eye at the scene. The first noteworthy discovery was in the passenger seat gap, a small torn piece of fabric, pale in color, soft fibers, not matching any type of clothing or item documented in Kara's wardrobe. The family confirmed that Kara did not own any clothing made of a nylon blend material like this. The size of the fabric fragment was too small to determine what kind of garment it came from, but it was clearly not the result of natural wear. The tear edge was sharp, the fibers stretched, suggesting a brief but forceful impact or grip. If this fragment came from the driver's clothing, it could provide DNA. The fabric was sampled immediately. Next came the shoe prints on the car mat. Although investigators had seen footprints outside at the scene, the shoe prints inside the car were far more significant because they identified who had stepped into the vehicle after Kara disappeared. The prints showed a size considerably larger than Kara's, estimated to be a men's shoe size, and the sole pattern did not match any pair from her personal life. Importantly, the prints were angled off to the side in the direction of someone leaning in to enter the driver's seat, not the light, straight stride typical of Kara. The presence of these prints confirmed that someone else had driven the car, and this person may have done so calmly, without haste. When the car mat was removed from the floor and examined under analysis lights, another crucial detail emerged. Two different types of mud adhered to the underside of the mat and along the edge near the rear door. One type matched the mud sample found at the vacant lot, where the search team discovered the tire tracks, while the second had a finer clay texture, characteristic of the area near the drainage ditch on Olive Street. This allowed the investigative team to conclude that the car had passed through at least two different locations on the night Kara disappeared, something that could not have happened if Kara had been driving, since she had no reason to take such a roundabout route at that late hour. Those two locations were not on the same logical route, making the hypothesis that the perpetrator moved freely and with quick planning stand out even more. The geological difference in the mud indicated that the driver did not just move the car to abandon it, but had stopped somewhere else beforehand, possibly the site of the approach or control of Kara, or where the perpetrator switched vehicles. Throughout the examination process, investigators looked for signs of a struggle inside the car, handprints, scratches, knee impacts on the dashboard, but found no marks consistent with a fight. No scratches on the leather seats, no hard kicks to the dashboard, no unusual loose hairs other than Kara's. This suggested that if Kara had been subdued, it happened outside the car or so quickly that she had no chance to resist. Behavioral experts assessed that the person carrying out the abduction may have approached Kara by surprise, from behind, or in a confined space near a narrow alley, leaving her no opportunity to fight back before being forced into the car or having her keys taken. The inside of the car door showed faint traces of hand oil or grease, but very light, possibly because the driver had worn thin gloves. There were no clear fingerprints available for analysis. The radio had not been touched, the driver's seat was pushed back, and the rearview mirror had been adjusted, all reinforcing the assessment that the driver was an individual unlike Kara in both height and driving habits. Under the passenger seat mat was a distinctive layer of dust, tiny wood shavings, very hard to spot, but present in small patches. This dust sample did not match the floors of Kara's home or workplace, but aligned more closely with areas involving warehouses or woodworking shops. This was a detail that could not be concluded immediately, but it was flagged for comparison with suspect areas as the investigation expanded. All the physical data began to converge into one behavioral pattern. The car was not the site of a struggle, it was used as a tool for transportation or misdirection. There were no signs that Kara had tried to escape from the car, no belongings of hers left in a scattered state, no indications that she had been behind the wheel after leaving the store. The logical analyses led to a conclusion officially recorded in the investigative report: the car had been deliberately used to mislead the search efforts. Parking it in a quiet residential area created the illusion that Kara had driven there herself and possibly continued on foot somewhere. But with the strange fabric fragment, the men's shoe prints, the mud from two different locations, and the complete absence of struggle marks, the most reasonable model was this. The perpetrator had driven the car, used it to create a false trail, then abandoned it in a low-attention spot to buy time before authorities uncovered the real clues. When the vehicle examination report was completed, the investigation moved into a new phase. Instead of asking where did Kara go, the investigators began asking a far more critical question: how was Kara taken from the scene, and what was the perpetrator trying to conceal? Right after the vehicle examination report indicated a high likelihood that Kara had been removed from the central area in a very short time, the investigative team returned to the witness group to reanalyze every single statement collected on the night of the missing person report. This was a crucial step because the perpetrator's behavior, if there was one, was most likely to have occurred within the same window as the scattered observations provided by residents. However, the deeper they delved into each statement, the more the investigative team realized that the timeline picture was far from seamless. On the contrary, it was disturbingly contradictory. The first witness, temporarily referred to as A, was a bartender who left a bar near the park right around the time Kara finished her shift. A stated that they saw a woman with a similar build to Kara walking quite quickly along the sidewalk, head slightly bowed, arms clutching her purse. According to A, the woman was alone and did not stop or interact with anyone. But A was standing quite far away, partially obscured by the dim yellow light reflecting off the wet pavement, so A admitted they were not certain it was really Kara. There was light rain at the time, which made visibility even hazier. A was only confident that the woman resembled Kara in build, but could not identify her face. Witness B, the owner of a flower shop that stayed open late, gave a completely different account. Bob reported seeing a woman, possibly Kara, standing under an awning on the side of a small street, talking to an unidentified person. Bob described the woman's hand movements as if she were trying to explain something, while the other person stood very close, seemingly pressing in or applying pressure. However, the shop's front camera was broken and had recorded nothing. Bob also could not determine the gender or height of the other person because of the dim light and the fact that both were backlit against the street lamp. Bob only remembered feeling that something was not right, because women rarely stood talking for long at that hour on that stretch of street, especially in the drizzling rain. Statement T opened up yet another direction. C lived in a third-floor apartment overlooking a section of street about 200 meters from the store where Kara worked. The time frame C described was very late, but they could not recall the exact moment. While cleaning the room, C heard a loud, intermittent sound, like a quick argument, or someone reacting. The noise was not clear enough to make out words, but C was certain a female voice rang out, abruptly cut off by a heavy impact, like something heavy hitting a wall or a metal door. C ran to the balcony, but saw only an empty street. Rain was falling in spots, no one was standing out there. If this really was Kara, it could have been the moment she was confronted, but it was also possible the sound had nothing to do with the case. C could not confirm. When cross-referencing these three statements, the investigative team immediately recognized a major problem: they could not all be accurate within the same time frame. If A saw a woman walking quickly alone, it would be very difficult for B to have seen someone resembling Kara standing and talking to another person at almost the same moment. If the argument C heard occurred at the location B described, then A should have seen a different situation, not a calm woman walking along the sidewalk. The investigators tried fitting each piece into a timeline diagram, but the pieces did not form a logical sequence. Each statement reflected one possibility, but none was strong enough to confirm absolutely. To address these contradictions, the behavioral team conducted a simulation of the time window when Kara left the store. What stood out was this: the area Kara passed through had only 3 possible routes, and the time to walk from the store to the parking lot was only about 2 to 3 minutes. Therefore, for 3 witnesses to see 3 different events, only 3 feasible scenarios existed. Only one of the 3 statements was correct, and the other 2 misidentified the subject. 2, each person saw a different moment of the same event, but memory was distorted due to lighting conditions and viewing angles. Or 3, the perpetrator and victim had moved so quickly that witnesses only caught half-faded traces of the incident, rather than the full picture. When assessing reliability, the investigative team realized that no witness was in a position to positively confirm that the person they saw was Kara. A did not see her face. B only saw the figure. C only heard the voice. This forced the investigators to re-evaluate the overall scene. Instead of relying on direct identification, they placed greater weight on the context in which the statements emerged. For example, if B was correct and Kara really was talking to someone, then A might have seen her afterward, after she had left the other person. Conversely, if A was correct, then C's argument sound could have been a completely unrelated event. But if C was correct, then both A and B might have misobserved someone else. An important factor was the lighting conditions. The stretch of road Kara walked along was under old streetlights, the rain reduced reflectivity, and people's shadows stretched long on the wet sidewalk, distorting size and posture. Combined with angled viewpoints, residents could easily mistake one figure for another. The police therefore shifted focus from determining which witness saw whom to examining what they saw. Even though the identity was uncertain, the 3 statements shared one critical common point: all described a sense of something abnormal occurring within the time window when Kara was believed to have left the store. A saw someone walking quickly. B saw a tense interaction. C heard a reaction abruptly cut off. 3 separate fragments, if standing alone, were very weak, but placed side by side, they described a shared state. The area around Kara was far from peaceful at the moment she disappeared. This was the most important finding the investigative team could draw. No one witnessed Kara being attacked, but the overall context made the possibility that she was forcefully approached entirely reasonable. The contradictions in the statements did not weaken the case, they simply reflected the chaotic nature of perception under poor lighting and a very brief time window. The investigators recorded a key conclusion: the witnesses did not help pinpoint the route Kara took, but they did help establish that criminal behavior very likely occurred right within that short time frame. With this picture in place, the investigation moved to the next step. If the statements could not clearly identify the victim or the perpetrator, then the only thing left to do was to identify the intersection point among the 3 descriptions, the location where every account pointed as the center of the abnormality. And it was right there, the police believed, that the first trace of the person who approached Kara was waiting to be discovered. Right after completing the analysis of the witness statements, the investigative team moved to the next standard step in any missing person case, showing signs of criminal activity, narrowing down the primary suspects, that is, individuals who had a level of familiarity or direct contact with the victim in the most recent period. The goal of this step was not only to identify potential perpetrators, but more importantly, to quickly rule out innocent parties, to avoid muddying an already increasingly complex investigation. Every person reviewed had to have a clear timeline, a suspicious motive, or the opportunity to access Kara within the time frame of her disappearance. The first person considered was Kara's ex-boyfriend, an individual that crime statistics always flagged as a priority suspect in cases of young women going missing. He was summoned that night and questioned about their current relationship, their most recent conversation, and his whereabouts at the time Kara finished her shift. After cross-referencing his statement with his work schedule, security camera footage from the restaurant where he had dinner with friends, and the payment receipt, the conclusion was very clear. He had a solid alibi. There was no gap in his timeline that would have allowed him to be near Park Central Square. He even cooperated fully, providing his phone and call history to confirm that the two of them had no conflicts in the week prior. One potential suspect was eliminated. The next list included Kara's co-workers, especially those whose shifts overlapped or ended close to the time she left the store. Investigators interviewed each one at the police station, asking them to recount that evening, their shift end times, and whether anyone had seen Kara leave the store with someone else. Most employees had finished earlier than Kara. The two who stayed later to do inventory were confirmed to have left the store about 15 minutes before Kara and driven home in the opposite direction from the route she took. A nearby intersection camera captured their vehicle moving exactly as described. Their timelines matched perfectly, with no indication they returned to the area around the store at the time Kara disappeared. This temporarily removed co-workers from the direct suspect pool. Next came the group of regular customers at the store, those who frequently appeared during Kara's working hours. This group was more complicated, because the relationship between customers and employees was often not clear enough to determine the level of contact. Several male customers were identified from the store's camera footage, invited in for separate interviews, and asked to provide statements. One who had been overly friendly toward Kara, a detail noted by coworkers, was examined more closely. However, when cross-checked against the shoe print data, estimated height, body shape and movement patterns that night, none of the regular customers matched the unfamiliar shoe prints found on the car mat or the vehicle's travel patterns along the analyzed routes. The investigative team also reviewed records of individuals with prior disruptive behavior or minor criminal histories in the area around the square, but none matched the physical evidence. No one owned shoes with a sole pattern consistent with the prints left in the car. Several questionable individuals were not present in the area at the time Kara finished her shift. One by one, they were removed from the list. At this point, the investigators began to notice a troubling common thread. Every person who knew or had contact with Kara did not fit the physical evidence. None of them matched the height, build, or footwear corresponding to the shoe prints in the car. None had the opportunity to approach Kara within that narrow time window. None fit the behavioral pattern the perpetrator had shown by moving the car to a residential area to create a false trail. This led to an unwelcome but highly probable conclusion: the perpetrator was not someone Kara knew. From here, the investigative team had to expand the suspect pool to those who could have accessed the central area at that time without drawing attention. People who lived near the square, night shift workers, delivery drivers, maintenance personnel, or even individuals who loitered in the area. But more importantly, the convergence between the witness statements and the evidence samples from the car began to form an emerging pattern. The perpetrator acted quickly, precisely, with preparation, and left no signs of a struggle. This did not resemble the behavior of an acquaintance acting out of sudden emotion. It resembled the behavior of someone who had stalked the victim or spent time observing her beforehand. One of the behavioral investigators stated that the perpetrator may have known Kara's usual route very well. He knew where the lighting was weak, where foot traffic was low, and especially that Kara left the store at a very consistent time. This only happens when the perpetrator had been watching for at least several days, if not weeks. There were no signs of impulsive action. Everything from taking the keys, moving the car through multiple locations, to parking it neatly in the residential area, showed calculation. From that point, the investigative team officially opened a new suspect branch. The perpetrator was a stranger, not someone with a personal connection to Kara. Possibly someone she had seen but not noticed. Possibly someone who passed through the area regularly. Or worse, possibly someone who had been following Kara for some time. When the preliminary analysis was forwarded to the local investigation group, they began reviewing all reports of unusual behavior around Park Central Square in the 2 weeks leading up to Kara's disappearance. Reports of a man standing near the parking lot stairway, reports of a silver pickup truck appearing repeatedly, and scattered complaints from a few shops about a man who often watched women leaving their shifts. All of this data had previously been downplayed because it was not specific enough. But in the new context, they became potential puzzle pieces. From here, speculation began to shift, given the characteristics of the case: no struggle, no resistance, no drag marks. The person who approached Kara may have chosen the exact moment when she was most vulnerable. That is the behavior of a stalker, an opportunistic strike, acting in seconds, then vanishing with the victim. And just as the investigative team prepared to expand the suspect list to those with no personal connection to the victim, a new lead emerged from the list of vehicles that had appeared around the square: the silver pickup truck that was present on the night Kara disappeared. For the first time, the investigation had an unnamed but clearly outlined subject, a stranger who appeared in the right place, at the right time, and fit the newly established crime pattern. An entirely new phase of the investigation began. In the process of re-reviewing all the reports from residents around Park Central Square, one detail that had previously been dismissed as minor now stood out in a troubling way: a silver pickup truck that appeared repeatedly over the course of about a week before Kara disappeared. This information had initially been downplayed because there was no clear criminal behavior attached to it. In an area with shops, bars, and parking lots, the presence of a pickup truck was not overly unusual. But when placed in the context of Kara's disappearance, within an extremely narrow time window, and signs of being watched, this vehicle suddenly became a crucial piece in the overall picture. The witness who reported the pickup was a middle-aged woman who lived near the park. She said the truck often parked across from the bakery, sometimes idling for just a few minutes with the engine running before leaving. On some days it appeared while Kara was closing the store, on others it stayed parked for hours with no one getting out. What was noteworthy was that she had never clearly seen the driver's face. The driver's side window was always partially lowered, the interior light very dim, making the figure just a blurry dark shape. She was only certain the driver was not a woman. Another witness, a delivery driver, had seen the silver pickup turn into the narrow street next to Kara's store and stop there for about a minute before turning around and leaving. When asked why he remembered it so clearly, he said the truck was moving at a very slow speed, like it was looking for something. After he finished his delivery and returned to his vehicle, the pickup was gone without anyone knowing which direction it went. No witness remembered the license plate. Some said the rear of the truck had a round black sticker. Others insisted there was nothing at all. Investigators realized that people's memories were too fragmented to pin down anything for certain, but one thing they all agreed on: the pickup did not belong to any local resident, and it appeared more often than normal. The police checked vehicle registration records in the area, but the description was too vague. A silver pickup was one of the most common vehicle types in Missouri at that time. There were thousands of similar trucks in the city, hundreds passing through the area each week. No license plate, no driver identification, no specific markings. The entire vehicle investigation unit shook their heads. This was the kind of lid that exists. However, for the behavioral analysis team that had just built the hypothesis of a prepared perpetrator, the truck carried special significance: a mid-size vehicle, neutral color, unremarkable, perfectly suited for stalking prey over multiple days. In Missouri state crime records, stalkers often used vehicles like dark sedans, older SUVs, and silver or gray pickups. Pickups were especially common because they blended in as familiar, and they could conceal people or items without raising suspicion. A veteran investigator remarked, "If someone wants to watch a young woman for days without being noticed, a silver pickup is the perfect choice." Also during that period, an old report from a coffee shop near the square noted that on 3 consecutive days, a silver vehicle was parked out front when Kara finished her shift. The employee at the time had even joked with a coworker that the guy in that truck seems to have nothing better to do than sit and watch people go by. When police followed up, he could not recall the driver's appearance clearly, only that the truck showed up right at closing time, 3 days in a row. That frequency could not be ignored. Another important fact: witness B's earlier statement described seeing a woman in a tense conversation with someone standing very close, but unable to see the other person's face clearly due to backlighting. When the lighting conditions and viewing angle were reconstructed, investigators realized that if that man had stepped out from a pickup parked dozens of meters away, the witness would have had no way to see his face clearly. The context matched in a deeply unsettling way. The more they looked, the more the image of the silver pickup stood out as the dividing line between someone known and a prepared stranger. If it had been someone familiar, they would not have needed to surveil her beforehand. They would already know Kara's schedule, her route, and would not have had to park near the store every day. On the other hand, if the perpetrator was a stranger with no prior knowledge of Kara, then observing from a distance over multiple days would have been necessary. The pickup's repeated appearances were a clear sign of pre-approach activity, a hallmark of offenders who select random targets, but plan meticulously. The Vehicle Investigation Group provided an analysis. If the pickup was truly involved, the driver had changed parking positions constantly, avoiding staying in the same spot too many times. This fit the witnesses' descriptions: one day parked near the bakery, another day on the curb across the street, another day just circling the square slowly without stopping. Every behavior fell within the pattern of probing, surveilling. Based on the compilation of all reports, the investigative team officially added the silver pickup to the list of objects to pursue. From here, an entirely new investigative branch was opened, tracking a prepared stalker, someone who may have observed Kara, understood her habits, chosen the exact moment and location to approach, and had the means to take her away in seconds. To accomplish that, the police began reviewing all traffic cameras and any private cameras in the area that retained footage longer than 24 hours. Even knowing the chances of capturing the silver pickup were very low due to the limitations of 1994 technology. At the same time, every report of a similar vehicle was collected, locations of sightings were marked chronologically, and plotted on a map as a movement density pattern. When those scattered dots were connected, an unexpected path emerged. The pickup appeared 4 times in areas with low lighting, within time frames that overlapped Kara's shifts. Each point lay along a potential perpetrator escape route. It could not be called evidence, but it was certainly not mere coincidence. From now on, the investigation no longer revolved solely around how Kara disappeared, but expanded to a far more dangerous question: who was patient and prepared enough to watch a young woman for days without being detected? Throughout the first 4 years after the day Kara disappeared, the investigation kept running into invisible walls, gaps that could not be filled even when the police force had mobilized every available resource. But by 1998, all those walls had piled up into one enormous obstacle, causing the case to gradually slip into a state that investigators referred to with a heavy term: frozen. Not because they gave up, but because each critical link in the file had broken away one by one over time. One of the biggest failures was the improper storage of evidence. The items collected from the interior of Kara's car, the strange fabric fragment, dust samples, mud traces and faint reflective marks, were stored according to the procedures of that time, which were not as rigorous as later standards. The storage room's temperature was unstable. The old evidence packaging easily absorbed moisture, leading to the degradation of several samples. The already thin small piece of fabric had part of its edge damaged, reducing the ability to analyze the weave. The mud samples mixed with environmental humidity, altering the mineral composition. Microscopic cell samples presumed to possibly contain DNA had degraded to the point where they could not be analyzed with 90s technology. When the forensic specialist reported the re-evaluation of the evidence in 1998, the answer nearly shattered any remaining hope. Many samples no longer have testing value. If evidence was the backbone, then cameras were the eyes of the investigation. But the ATM camera near Park Central Square, one of the few cameras that existed in 1994, had overwritten its data after only 72 hours. By the time police realized the potential importance of the footage, the system had recorded hundreds of new transactions. No images remained from the night Kara disappeared, no figure walking by, no shadow of the silver pickup, no license plate reflecting the lights. Just one lost tape, but it was the single piece that could have confirmed the presence of the suspicious vehicle in the area. Ironically, the limited surveillance technology of that era was precisely the reason a vital lead vanished forever. During the same period, two key witnesses in the case moved away from Springfield. Witness B, the one who had seen a woman in a tense conversation with someone under an awning, moved to another state to care for family. Witness C, the one who heard the argument abruptly cut off, relocated for work reasons. When police reached out again in 1997, their memories had faded. What had once been sharp from the initial impression had become vague, generalized descriptions lacking detail. Statements that were already uncertain now carried even less legal weight. One of the things investigators always feared had come to pass: human memory fades over time, and the Kara Hollis case was a textbook example. There also needed to be a clear suspect to compare against the evidence, but no one fit to be brought to the examination table. No acquaintance had a motive. Regular customers did not match the evidence. The silver pickup appeared, but had no license plate or driver identification. Reports of stalking or suspicious behavior in the area at that time were not specific enough to open surveillance files. Police had evidence but no person to compare it to. They had information about the pickup, but could not identify who was driving. They had statements but could not match them into a reliable timeline. The case stood in a perfect void, where every piece of information lacked one edge to fit into the full picture. Finally, the human factor also contributed to the file slowly losing vitality. The lead investigator on the case, the one who had memorized every small detail, every statement, every sighting of the pickup, decided to retire in 1998, after more than 30 years of service. When he left, the Kara Hollis case was handed over to new investigators, but each could only approach the file through documents, unable to recreate the feel, intuition, and original context that the former investigator had understood so deeply. The already complex case file was now fragmented across different groups, each focusing on only one part: the statement analysis group, the vehicle group, the local area group, the forensics group. This caused the once continuous flow of information to break into disconnected branches that were hard to reconnect. By the end of 1998, after every investigative direction had hit a dead end, the Springfield police made a decision no one wanted. The Kara Hollis case was classified as a cold case. The file was removed from the priority list and moved to long-term storage. There was no longer dedicated manpower following every new lead. No specialized team reviewing evidence monthly. Occasional resident reports about the silver pickup still came in, but none were strong enough to reopen the investigation. Rumors in the community gradually faded. The name Kara Hollis was still mentioned, but more as a mysterious regret of the city than as a case with a clear direction. The case did not close with truth, but with the silence of leads that could go no further. And from then on, Kara Hollis became one of the most haunting names on Springfield's list of unsolved disappearances, a person who vanished within less than 500 meters, on an ordinary night, leaving no clear trace, and no one knew what had happened. But all cold cases share one common trait: they sleep, but they do not disappear. They wait for one final piece, no matter how small, to appear and revive the entire investigative machine that seemed to have stopped. Kara's case was no exception. In 2012, nearly 2 decades after the Kara Hollis file was placed on the cold case list, a new opportunity opened up when the Missouri State Forensics Lab announced the launch of a program to re-examine old evidence using next-generation DNA technology. This was a project of special significance in the investigative community. A series of cases long thought buried by time were brought back for review, in the hope that modern techniques could detect traces that 90s technology could not identify. The Kara Hollis case, despite missing many pieces, was selected for inclusion partly because of its severity, and partly because newer investigators saw potential in evidence that had once been considered too weak for analysis. Among the still viable evidence items, the hair sample found on the car mat was one of the first targets for re-examination. It had been tested back in 1994, but the results were inconclusive because the technology of the time could not extract sufficient genetic information. The hair also lacked a complete root, which caused it to be undervalued forensically. However, by 2012, labs possessed improved PCR techniques that allowed amplification of extremely small remaining DNA segments. When the high-tech forensics team received the hair sample, they began by cleaning it, removing dust fibers, and separating any remaining epidermal cells clinging to the hair shaft. Under the microscope, they found an extremely limited quantity of microcells, but enough to attempt a hybridization analysis. The results revealed something that had never been achieved in the previous 18 years, a partial DNA profile, an incomplete DNA profile containing only scattered genetic loci, but strong enough to confirm that the hair did not belong to any member of her family. This was the first time there was genetic evidence showing a third party had been inside the car at a time relevant to the disappearance. This partial profile included only a small portion of the total DNA markers needed for full identification, but it was sufficient for the forensics team to enter it into the automated comparison system CODIS. CODIS ran comparisons against hundreds of thousands of DNA profiles in the national system, violent offenders, convicted individuals, and biometric samples stored in forensic records. The result came back as no match, no matching profile was found. This carried two important implications. One, the suspect had never been DNA tested because they had never been arrested or had no prior convictions. Two, the suspect might not belong to the typical group of offenders who commit violent crimes, making the crime pattern harder to predict. This was not the type of perpetrator with a history left in judicial records. He could be an ordinary citizen who had never been suspected before and therefore never entered the system. When the no-match report was forwarded to the cold case team, a meeting was convened with the central question: if the perpetrator was not in CODIS, then who was he? Progressive investigators in the analysis group began to hypothesize Kara's abductor was a clean individual in terms of the justice system. No prior offenses, no arrests, no traces left in any incident that would have required police to collect DNA. That was precisely why he had remained outside the entire investigative radar for so many years. This fit the observed behavior: quick approach, no struggle, no obvious traces left behind, and apparent prior surveillance. All of it pointed to a cautious, low-risk perpetrator with preparation. This analysis forced the police to shift strategy. Instead of focusing on individuals with prior legal issues, the potential suspect list now had to expand to the group of completely anonymous strangers, people with no criminal record, no prior incidents, or any unusual signs in their past. This made the investigation more difficult, but it was also the breakthrough point. If the perpetrator was not in CODIS, then the only path to identifying him was to wait for further technological advances, or to expand the investigation into an entirely new field: genetic genealogy. A veteran investigator, who had been involved in the early phase of the case before retiring, made a statement that silenced the room. If that guy isn't in the system, then only time and technology will bring him to light. That was not a lament, but a realistic assessment. At that moment, the partial profile was not sufficient to track down the perpetrator, but storing it was an important obligation, because in the future, any relative of the suspect, or the suspect himself, if sampled for DNA in another case, would immediately trigger a match. Therefore, the DNA profile was processed, encoded, and entered into the cold case waiting database, a form of automated watch list. Whenever a new DNA profile was entered into the system, no matter from which state, the system would compare it against the hair sample from Kara's car to look for matches. This was a passive but extremely effective process, if enough time passed. The investigative team closed the updated file with a clear conclusion: the evidence had opened a new path. The perpetrator was someone not in any criminal record, but he had left a trace that future technology could illuminate. In reality, that DNA profile had become the most important piece the case had acquired since 1994. It did not solve the mystery immediately, but it laid the foundation for an entirely new investigative direction, preparing for the event that would occur more than a decade later, the time when DNA genealogy technology began to change the entire way the world solved cases. The file was closed once again, but this time, instead of despair, it was closed with hope that someday those scattered DNA segments would find their true owner. In the many years after the partial DNA profile from the hair sample was stored, the Kara Hollis file once again slipped back into the familiar silence of a cold case. But during the period from 2015 to 2024, the explosive development of a field once considered on the fringes of forensic science, genealogy DNA, genetic genealogy, brought an unexpected turning point. Millions of Americans sent their DNA samples to genealogy companies to trace their ancestral roots, and this inadvertently created a vast genetic network that could help solve cases that had gone unanswered for decades. When the state of Missouri signed cooperation agreements with several genealogy analysis companies, a series of cold cases were brought into experimental screening, including the Kara Hollis case. In 2019, the genealogy system returned the first signal from the partial profile of the hair found in Kara's car. The result did not match any specific individual directly, because the profile was not complete enough to identify one person, but it matched a large genetic group, showing genetic similarity at the family or clan level. The most prominent name in that group, the Whitmore family. This was a coincidence that could not be ignored, because in genealogy, surnames are not just names, they also indicate geographic origins and family branches across many decades. From there, the investigative team began entering the phase of analyzing Springfield residency from 1990 to 2000, the period most likely to pinpoint where the perpetrator might have been at the time of Kara's disappearance. This was an enormous task. They had to backtrack through tax records, property registrations, rental agreements, voter registrations, even utility service data. Anyone with the Whitmore surname living in or near Springfield during that time had to be verified. But genealogy is not a straight line. It creates complex branches. Some people carried the Whitmore name but were not genetically related. Conversely, some did not carry the Whitmore name but belonged to the family branch through the maternal line. So the investigative group had to combine multiple data sources to determine who truly belonged to the genetic group potentially linked to the partial profile. After nearly 6 months of analysis, cross-referencing and elimination, the final list was narrowed down to 12 Whitmore individuals in Missouri, all of whom lived or had lived within a 150-kilometer radius of Springfield during the 90s. Notably, 4 out of the 12 had resided directly in the city of Springfield at the time Kara disappeared. The number was small enough to focus the investigation, yet large enough to slow progress if there was no clear method of prioritization. The next step for the investigative team was to rank them by level of access, determining which of the 12 could have had contact with Kara in 1994. To do that, they went back through every smallest milestone: workplaces, daily routes, shops around the square, vehicle records, night shift jobs, even patterns of movement frequency in each neighborhood of the city at that time. Clues that had once been scattered now began to show possible connections. One person on the list had worked at a parking lot in the area, but had left Springfield in 1993, eliminated. Another lived near Springfield, but worked 90 kilometers away in the suburbs at the time of the case, no opportunity. 3 others on the list were students at the time, neither living nor working near the areas Kara frequented. The list was reduced to 3 names, whose residency and work schedules aligned with the area where Kara disappeared. Even more notably, some names began to show striking geographic links. One Whitmore had lived in a residential area, only 2 blocks from where Kara's car was found. Another had worked as a delivery driver in the downtown area, frequently passing through Park Central Square around the time Kara closed. Yet another had registered a temporary address near the street, where a witness heard the interrupted argument. All these small details began to form a hazy but noticeable outline around a specific group of people. When cross-referencing old reports, the investigative team discovered one additional detail: one Whitmore individual, owned a silver pickup truck in 1994, according to vehicle registration records. The truck had been sold many years earlier, but the archived records still existed. This was the most important lead yet, because it connected three elements that had previously been seen as separate: the partial DNA profile genealogy, the silver pickup reported by witnesses in the week Kara disappeared. Although it was impossible to conclude which person on the list was the perpetrator, the connection between this surname group and the crime scene could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. In fact, this was the first time in many years that the Kara Hollis case had a particularly clear and consistent investigative direction, one that modern genetic science had opened up. A behavioral investigator offered this assessment: if the perpetrator belongs to the Whitmore family, he may not have left traces anywhere else, but his DNA is gradually being encircled without him even knowing. The difficult part, however, still lay ahead. The partial DNA profile was not sufficient to identify a specific suspect, but it was enough to designate this group of 12 as the priority watch list. Each one needed further scrutiny, through employment history, vehicles once owned, residential addresses, and any reported behavior in the years following the case. With this genealogy foundation in place, the Kara Hollis case officially emerged from its state of indefinite limbo. Though there was still no answer, for the first time since 1994, investigators were able to draw a circle containing people who could be directly linked to the hair sample found on the car mat, and within that circle, one name began to appear more frequently than the others, a name that would soon become the central focus of the entire investigation: Sam Whitmore. After the list of 12 Whitmore individuals was identified, and some names began to stand out due to their geographic connections, the investigators decided to re-examine the entire employment records of the target group from the early 1990s. This required a far more meticulous process than what current digital records can provide. Back then, many companies still used handwritten timesheets, paper shift slips, and delivery schedules recorded in thick time-faded logbooks. One of the companies added to the verification list was Crown Valley Logistics, which had hired general laborers on flexible shifts, a type of job that several Whitmore family members on the list had once held. When the investigators contacted the company's archives department, they did not hold high expectations. Most paper records from the 90s had been discarded according to regulations after a certain period. But fortunately, Crown Valley Logistics was one of the few businesses that retained records longer than the minimum requirement due to past labor disputes. The basement archive held hundreds of old cardboard boxes, each labeled with the year and marker. When the archivist opened the boxes from 1994, they found numerous delivery and receipt schedule logbooks, green-covered books with yellowed paper, a mix of handwritten and scribbled printed entries. Only portions were still legible, but the investigators only needed data from the night Kara disappeared. As they flipped through each logbook, they discovered a particular entry: night delivery log for July 14, 1994. The list of drivers working the evening shift that night was recorded fairly clearly, and amid the unrelated names, one name stood out and immediately caught the investigators' attention: Sam Whitmore. The name matched one of the individuals on the genealogy list, and more importantly, matched the person who had once lived near where Kara's car was found. This was the first time in the genealogy process that concrete evidence from 1994 directly aligned with a suspect on the list. But what made this record especially significant was not just Sam's name appearing, but his delivery route that night. The log clearly noted each stop, each address, and each time frame. When cross-referenced with the 1994 Springfield map against those delivery points, the investigative team discovered that one of Sam's stops was right next to Park Central Square, only about 200 meters from the store where Kara worked. This was an extremely sensitive time frame, as it fell precisely within the window when Kara finished her shift. In addition, the log recorded the time Sam completed the delivery in that area as 10:21 p.m., a time very close to when Kara was believed to have disappeared, based on witness statements. According to the log, Sam was supposed to proceed to the next delivery point on Olive Street at 10:24 p.m. and complete it by 10:31 p.m. But when the investigative team examined the confirmation section for the completion of the Olive Street delivery, they found something unusual. Sam did not sign off on completion at the scheduled time, and the recipient had left a notation "not present." That meant no one confirmed that Sam had arrived at the delivery point within the stated time. This time gap, when recalculated, amounted to 38 minutes from the moment Sam was recorded leaving the delivery point near Park Central Square until he appeared at another delivery point on the east side of the city. Under normal conditions, that distance should have taken only 11 to 13 minutes by car, depending on speed and road conditions. The fact that Sam took nearly 40 minutes to cover such a short route could not be explained by traffic, weather, or any other objective factor, especially since there was no heavy rain at the time, and traffic data showed low vehicle volume in the area. These 38 missing minutes became the focal point of the investigation. They were long enough to carry out an approach, subdue Kara, and move her to another location, but they were also short enough not to be noticed by others or draw attention from coworkers. When the delivery log was overlaid on the map, investigators noticed that the route Sam could have taken during those 38 minutes aligned with the area of the vacant lot where the first mud sample was found under the mat in Kara's car. This was no longer ordinary coincidence. Another piece of evidence further drew the investigative team's attention. Sam's signatures at the remaining delivery points that night were fairly consistent, but the one recorded after the 38-minute gap showed a slightly shaky hand and uneven strokes. This could have resulted from fatigue, but it could also indicate the tension of someone whose heart rate had just spiked from doing something intense. When placed alongside the partial DNA profile matching the Whitmore family group, combined with Sam's former residence only a few blocks from where Kara's car was found, the investigators could not ignore the connection. Sam not only shared the surname with the DNA profile, but he was also present at the right place and the right time, and he had vanished from his schedule for exactly the amount of time needed to commit an abduction. The internal report concluded with a short but decisive note: Sam Whitmore is now officially the #1 priority suspect. To understand the 38 minutes missing from Sam Whitmore's schedule, the investigative team did not rely solely on the delivery log, but also needed to reconstruct the entire Springfield of 1994. This required going back to paper maps, old routes, demolished alleys, and vacant lots that no longer existed. A specialized GIS Geographic Information Systems team was mobilized, using early satellite data, district maps from the 90s, and urban planning records, to rebuild the actual route Sam could have taken during the missing time window. When overlaying Sam's delivery points onto the 1994 Springfield map, the GIS team noticed that the standard route between the two delivery points offered only one shortest path, a straight line with no reason to detour onto side roads. But when they input the delivery log data into the movement model, they discovered something abnormal. The 38 minutes did not match the standard route at all. Even if Sam drove slowly, stopped for a few minutes, or encountered minor obstacles, he could not have exceeded 20 minutes. The 38-minute figure only appeared if Sam turned onto one of 3 side routes outside his delivery path. The GIS team simulated all feasible detour options using 1994 traffic recreation software, accounting for street speeds and signal conditions of the time. Out of 9 simulated possibilities, only one route met the conditions to produce 38 minutes, the route leading to the vacant lot south of Rivercut, an area known for old storage warehouses where trucks often paused while waiting for loads. This was exactly the place where search teams had once found mud matching the sample under the mat in Kara's car. The result left the entire investigative team silent for several seconds. For the past 20 years, that vacant lot had been regarded only as a vague detail with no clear evidence. But GIS had shown Sam would have had to turn in there to create the 38-minute gap. The forensics team was then asked to reanalyze the mud sample stuck under the mat in Kara's car, using modern mineralogical techniques. When comparing the 1994 mud sample with one collected from the vacant lot, where Sam most likely stopped, they found the mineral composition matched almost perfectly. Characteristic light gray limestone particles, fine clay ratio of 27%, traces of red-brown iron oxide adhered in granular form. This was not ordinary coincidence. This type of mud only appeared within a very narrow radius around the vacant lot, and was not present in any other areas Kara had passed through. From here, investigators began building a timeline model of Sam's approach to Kara. Assuming Sam left the delivery point at 10:21 p.m., they calculated three possibilities. 1. Sam approached Kara right at Park Central Square. The distance was close, the approach time quick, fitting with no witnesses seeing anything clearly. Algorithm calculations showed an approach and key-taking action could occur in just 6 to 10 seconds if the perpetrator was prepared. This matched the behavioral profile approach from behind, force into a dark spot, leaving the victim no chance to resist. 2. Sam removed Kara from the area in under 2 minutes. Simulation showed that if Sam used the pickup or another vehicle, he could get Kara away from the scene fast enough that no one would see. Witness A's and C's statements describing a figure moving away quickly and a voice abruptly cut off aligned with this timing. 3. Sam drove to the vacant lot. Driving time from the approach point to the vacant lot under 1994 road conditions, 7 to 9 minutes. Time spent at the vacant lot, 18 to 20 minutes, long enough to check on the victim, handle evidence, switch vehicles if applicable, or cover initial traces. Total time 36 to 39 minutes, perfectly matching the 38-minute gap in the delivery log. This was the first time in the entire case that all the data, DNA genealogy, delivery log, geographic analysis, mud sample, witness statements, merged into one seamless logical chain. No longer were they scattered clues as in years past, they formed a highly connected sequence of events. Sam belonged to the matching genealogy group. Sam was present near Kara at the exact time she disappeared. Sam vanished for 38 minutes, long enough to commit the crime. Sam had been at the vacant lot, where the mud from that area ended up on the mat in Kara's car. Sam worked as a delivery driver, had a vehicle, and had legitimate reasons to be in many places without raising suspicion. And most importantly, Sam deviated from the standard route, an action that could not be explained if he was simply doing his delivery job. When presenting the results to the Cold Case Command Board, both the GIS and forensics teams affirmed, this is the first true logical breakthrough in the case. The Kara Hollis case finally had a suspect who not only matched the genealogical DNA, but also matched behavior, route, geography, and timing. From here, the investigation moved into a new phase, finding the answer that no one had been able to provide for 30 years. What did Sam Whitmore really do during those 38 minutes? The investigation reached the point where all the pieces converged on one focal point. Sam Whitmore was no longer just the standout name in the delivery log. He had become the most likely suspect, with his behavior, geography, and mud traces matching in a deeply unsettling way. With sufficient legal grounds from genealogical DNA, GIS data, and the unexplained 38-minute gap, the Springfield police immediately obtained a search warrant for Sam's current residence, as well as the old house he had lived in back in 1994, now owned by someone else. This was a critical step, because any remaining evidence could be the key to unlocking the answer the city had waited decades for. When the Special Investigative Task Force entered Sam's current home, they did not expect too much. 30 years had passed. Any items once connected to criminal behavior, if they ever existed, could have been discarded, replaced, or destroyed over time. Still, they conducted a thorough search: living room, garage, attic, storage shed, even the cardboard boxes hidden deep behind cabinets. The surprise came when they opened a drawer in Sam's old wooden desk. Inside was a thin, aged folder with worn edges. Among the papers, a folded 1994 Springfield map appeared. By itself it said nothing, but when the investigative team unfolded that map, they froze. On the map, a route was marked in faint red ink from the Park Central Square area to the vacant lot south of Rivercut. Precisely the route that the GIS analysis had determined Sam must have taken during the missing 38 minutes. This could not be coincidence. The map also marked several other small points, locations with poor lighting, shortcuts, places a person intending to stalk someone would pay special attention to. One investigator blurted out, he studied Kara's route before committing the crime. In another room, the forensics team found a woman's name tag, an old faded plastic piece with the name LP printed in italics. It was not Kara's, and it was not connected to any record of hers. But investigators immediately recognized the significance. Stalkers often keep small items taken from women they fixate on, a kind of pathological trophy. The fact that Sam kept an unfamiliar name tag further reinforced the hypothesis that he had stalking behavior years before Kara disappeared. The name tag was seized for microscopic DNA comparison and to check against reports of lost items from women in the area. The next piece of evidence was even more chilling. Inside a locked wooden box, forensics discovered a torn diary with missing pages in the middle. That gap, the torn-out pages, corresponded exactly to the week Kara disappeared. The diary entries were very regular up to July 12, then jumped straight to July 18. When handwriting experts examined the remaining pages, they determined the torn pages were not accidental or careless. The tears were deliberate, straight, as if someone had intentionally removed the content. They did not yet know what Sam had written, but tearing out exactly the period when Kara vanished was an unignorable match. None of this was enough to directly prove criminal acts, but it painted a clear psychological pattern. Sam stalked women, observed their routes, recorded something he later wanted to erase, and kept items from another woman. This pattern dangerously aligned with offenders who hunt targeted victims. When the search team moved to the rear storage shed, they found a set of tools inside a plastic box, white nylon rope, long, thin but strong, the exact type commonly used in silent restraint cases. Along with the nylon rope was another Springfield map, marked less heavily, showing that Sam had owned multiple copies of 1994 maps. These items were not sufficient to form charges, but to the investigators they indicated preparation, a key element in abductions that leave no obvious traces. In the same room, they found an old metal box containing miscellaneous items, batteries, screws, small rope and a roll of black duct tape that had partially unraveled. When ultraviolet light was shown, the wooden table surface near the box reflected faint glowing areas, indicating adhesive material or plastic had once been pulled across it. It could not yet be concluded that Sam had committed violence, but it added further grounds for suspicion. The deeper they searched, the clearer the investigators' feeling became. Sam did not merely coincidentally match so many elements, he embodied every characteristic of a stalker: stalking women's routes, keeping items from other women, preparing restraint tools, erasing records from a sensitive time period, focusing on dark areas and shortcuts. The forensics team also found a thin notebook listing locations around the city, mostly places with low lighting, rear entrances, underground parking lots, ideal spots for undetected approaches. This was a low-risk map according to criminal behavioral models, and it almost exactly replicated the points where witnesses had described seeing a strange man appear during the month Kara disappeared. When all the evidence was compiled, the lead investigator stated in the internal report, "We are no longer dealing with a coincidental suspect. Every sign points to someone who planned, surveilled, and selected a target." The search of Sam's home did not reveal direct traces of Kara, but it provided something more important: behavioral evidence, which in cold cases sometimes carries more weight than physical evidence. And with what was found, the investigators had taken a longer step forward than at any point since 1994. Sam Whitmore was no longer just a suspect, he was becoming the only person whose crime pattern matched the entire Kara Hollis case completely. The next step was unavoidable: looking deeper into Sam's past, from the people around him to everything he had done over the past 30 years. Only then would the truth begin to emerge. After the search of Sam Whitmore's home revealed the 1994 Springfield map, marked with Kara's usual route, the unfamiliar woman's name tag, the diary pages torn out exactly during the week Kara disappeared, and the set of nylon rope stored in a sealed box, the behavioral analysis team was immediately convened that very night to build the most accurate profile of Sam, one that could tie all the scattered evidence into a clear criminal pattern. The first thing that stood out in the analysis was the behavioral sequence of surveillance, approach, isolation, a classic cycle typical of abductors who operate in the shadows. From the map marked with Kara's route, highlighting points of low lighting, from the underground parking lot locations, and narrow alleys leading to side roads, the analysis team concluded that Sam had observed the victim for many days, possibly even weeks before acting. The fact that he noted and marked the darkest spots around Park Central Square showed this was not impulsive behavior, but a fully deliberate planning process, further reinforced by his keeping a name tag from another woman, a common manifestation in stalking offender profiles, storing trophies to maintain a sense of control. The behavioral experts continued expanding their review of the seized items, the nylon rope, black duct tape, old maps, and the notebook listing low-risk locations. Each item individually fit the standard profile of someone capable of carrying out a silent abduction, choosing low-traffic spots, quick approach, restraint in seconds, removing the victim from the area, and handling evidence in an extremely short time. That pattern perfectly matched the way Kara disappeared in just a matter of seconds, exactly as witnesses described: a blurred figure, a reaction abruptly cut off, and then complete emptiness afterward. When the analysis team cross-referenced Sam's delivery schedule with witness reports, they discovered a disturbing coincidence. Sam had appeared around Kara's workplace at least 6 times in the 12 days leading up to her disappearance, right at the time she finished her shift, or immediately around the store's closing time. Those repeated appearances were not random, especially since Sam had no official work reason to be in the area on those days. The silver pickup's multiple appearances around the square further elevated Sam's image as an individual moving in a clear pattern, arriving early, parking in concealed spots, watching women leave their shifts, memorizing routes, choosing the opportune moment. When expanding the behavioral analysis to other missing persons cases within a 50-kilometer radius of Springfield during the 90s, the investigative team found 2 cases with features almost identical to Kara's: young women walking alone, dark routes, no struggle, no clear witness identification of the perpetrator, and bodies not found immediately, leaving the cases in limbo. Even more chilling, historical GPS data from Crown Valley Logistics showed Sam had been within a 1-kilometer radius of the areas of those 2 disappearances, only months apart. Though not enough to charge, the repeated coincidences further strengthened the suspicion that Sam had a prolonged behavioral pattern, not just in Kara's case, but potentially linked to other unresolved incidents. To determine the degree of match between Sam and FBI-documented stalking offender profiles, the analysis team used the 9 core behavioral criteria for stalking offender. Sam matched 7 of them. 1 flexible work schedule allowing presence anywhere without drawing attention. 2 ability to memorize and understand the target area's geographic layout. 3 surveillance of the victim's route over multiple days. 4 ownership of an inconspicuous vehicle that blended easily into the environment. 5 keeping items from other women as a form of fetishistic trophy. 6 preparing restraint tools such as nylon rope, and 7 tearing out records related to the crime period, a classic psychological trace erasure behavior. The 2 missing criteria belong to impulsive behavior groups, but Sam's lack of them actually fit even better with planned offending. The behavioral experts concluded, everything from Sam's routes, the 38-minute gap, the found evidence, to his habit of observing women, formed a unified logical chain, one in which Sam was no longer just someone present near the scene, but the individual with motive, opportunity, and the crime pattern that fit best. When combined with the behavioral profile, GIS analysis, delivery log, and DNA genealogy, Sam emerged not only as the primary suspect, but as the single individual whose movement pattern matched the entire case progression from beginning to end. At this point, the investigative team understood they were no longer facing an ordinary man who happened to be on the list, but a person who had spent time observing, selecting a target, and acting with cold calculation. Sam Whitmore's behavioral profile, for the first time in 3 decades, had brought the Kara Hollis case to a point where every trace converged. Sam not only had the capability to commit the crime, he matched every element the case required of a perpetrator. After Sam Whitmore's behavioral profile was established, DNA genealogy narrowed the scope, the delivery log decoded the unexplained 38 minutes, and the 1994 map from Sam's home pointed to the surveillance route of Kara. The investigative team understood they were very close to the point where they could request an arrest warrant, but to ensure unassailable legal standing, they needed something that had been absent for 3 decades: direct DNA evidence from Sam in the context of the case. Ironically, what they needed appeared from an unexpected place, a dusty corner of the old cold storage in the Greene County Records basement. During a 2025 inventory check of the storage facility, staff discovered a misfiled cardboard box covered in thick dust, its label so faded it was nearly illegible. The box had been placed in the outdated commercial records section, and no one thought it had any connection to a criminal case. But when the manager opened it, inside were old evidence bags, most with faded or missing tags. One of them was a sealed nylon evidence bag from 1994 standards, bearing a barely visible line of text, "Recovered near vehicle, July 94. The investigative team was summoned immediately. When they opened the old evidence bag, what lay inside silenced the meeting room: a yellowed white handkerchief, folded in half with a faint blood stain in the lower left corner, a piece of evidence once deemed unrelated and misfiled, lost for 3 decades. The faded case number on the bag caused it to be miscategorized as unidentified evidence, and therefore it had never been tested in later DNA analysis rounds. The handkerchief's emergence at the exact moment investigators needed corroborating proof was not luck, but the consequence of administrative oversights in 1994, oversights that inadvertently preserved the case's most critical lead. The handkerchief was immediately transferred to the Missouri State Forensics Lab, where analysts used the latest next-generation DNA technology, ultra-sensitive extraction techniques capable of recovering samples from heavily degraded cells. The blood stain on the handkerchief was so faint it was nearly invisible to the naked eye, but with 2025 sequencing systems, what had been impossible in 1994 now became a clear opportunity. The analysis process took 19 hours, and when the DNA profile appeared on the screen, the forensics team leader immediately called the lead investigator. The result consisted of just 4 words: matched to Sam Whitmore. The 30-year-old faint blood sample matched Sam's DNA profile in the expanded genealogy system. Not a partial match, not a family line match, a direct match. The match probability reached 99.9982%, equivalent to the level used to secure murder convictions in court. When the DNA from the handkerchief was compared to the partial DNA profile from the hair found on the mat in Kara's car, forensics confirmed both pieces of evidence came from the same individual. For the first time since 1994, the investigation was no longer relying on behavioral inference or indirect signs. It now held double evidence: a direct connection between Sam and the crime scene, hair in the car, blood on the handkerchief. Both reinforced each other, eliminating any possible defense. Additionally, the analysis team re-examined the old filing system and discovered that the handkerchief was on the list of evidence collected around the area where Kara's car was found on the night it was discovered. The most logical explanation: when Sam abandoned the car in the residential area, he inadvertently left the handkerchief, possibly used to wipe his hands, cover the door handle or handle items, but it fell out or was blown out of the vehicle. Police recovered it, but due to a coding error, it was never processed for analysis. This explained why Sam's actions that night always had a small flaw. He was careful, but not perfectly flawless. The forensics lab immediately added the test results to the cold case file. With direct DNA evidence, the unexplained 38-minute gap, the surveillance map, the torn diary, the nylon rope, and a behavioral profile matching 7 out of 9 stalking offender criteria, the Kara Hollis case was no longer in the realm of suspicion. It had moved into certainty. The internal report sent to the Missouri State Prosecutor's Office stated clearly, combining the new DNA evidence with behavioral evidence and geographic data produces a probability of guilt exceeding the prosecution threshold. Conclusion: Sam Whitmore is the sole suspect fitting the entire chain of evidence. Within 48 hours after the DNA results were confirmed, the Kara Hollis case was reopened at the highest priority level, a status reserved only for cases with immediate prosecutorial potential. The media had not yet been informed, but within law enforcement circles, the news spread like electricity. A 30-year unsolved mystery, one of Springfield's darkest enigmas, finally had a clear perpetrator. Sam Whitmore was no longer just a name in the genealogy file, no longer just the man who lost 38 minutes in the delivery log, no longer just the owner of the 1994 map. He was now the person whose DNA tied him directly to the scene, and the investigation moved into its most critical phase, locking down Sam's movement network and bringing him to justice. As soon as the DNA results from the 30-year lost handkerchief matched Sam Whitmore, the special case team decided to summon Sam to the interrogation room under the pretext of updating information in an old file. Sam sat across from two veteran investigators, displaying an overly calm demeanor for someone just called to the police station in a serious missing person case. They started with neutral questions about his past, his work schedule in 1994, and the routes he took during his delivery shifts. Sam answered quickly, but that very speed became the first point of suspicion. His statements did not match the 1994 delivery log that the investigative team already had in hand. When asked why he claimed to have followed the route exactly, Sam insisted, "I remember clearly," but the log written in Sam's own handwriting showed he left the delivery point near Park Central Square much later. The contradiction appeared almost immediately. The investigators did not press hard, they simply noted it, changed the subject, then returned to the same question phrased differently. This time Sam said that year, "Maybe I went straight to Olive Street," but that was a completely different answer from just minutes earlier. This constant shifting was recorded as deliberate evasion. A language analysis expert was invited to sit in the observation room and monitor every way Sam constructed his sentences. When asked, "Did you ever meet Kara Hollis before?" Sam replied, "No, I never knew her." The unconscious use of "we" immediately caught the observation room's attention. People with no connection to the victim never use the plural pronoun when denying acquaintance. "We" is a classic linguistic slip that appears when the speaker is mentally picturing a situation involving two people present, and this raised an entirely new question: did Sam have an accomplice? The investigators did not react immediately. They continued letting Sam talk, trying to make him comfortable enough to reveal more unconscious slips. When the questioning shifted to the 38-minute gap in the delivery log, Sam began changing his body language. He crossed his arms, looked down at the table, and rubbed his neck with one hand, a classic sign of defensiveness. The investigator asked, "Why did the route between your two delivery points take 38 minutes when the standard route should have taken no more than 13 minutes at most?" Sam responded with a repeated phrase, "I don't remember it being that long." The interrogator slid the document in front of Sam, pointing to his own signature at the delayed delivery point. Sam fell silent, lips pressed tight. Another investigator brought out the 1994 map, found in Sam's home, and asked, "Why did you mark these routes?" Sam answered, "I like old maps, that's all." But when asked why the marked points matched the areas Kara frequented, Sam averted his eyes and shifted the topic to how he doesn't remember the past clearly. But the interrogation truly shifted when the police asked directly, "Did you go to the vacant lot south of Rivercut on the night of July 14, 1994? This was the pivotal question, because GIS had proven that only by turning into that area could Sam create the 38-minute gap. Sam reacted far too strongly for an innocent person. "Why would I go there? I had no reason." The answer came out so fast it sounded like a reflex, not an explanation. The investigator pressed, "Are you sure?" "Because the mud sample under the mat in Kara's car matches exactly the soil from that lot." Sam immediately straightened in his chair, shaking his head. "I don't know anything about that vacant lot." But the behavioral expert in the observation room noted. Sam sat up straight, shoulders tensed, fingers tapping rapidly on his thigh, signs of extreme stress when touched on the truth he wanted to hide. The investigator changed direction, asking more gently, "If you don't remember, we can check further." But can you tell us whether during that evening shift you were with anyone else? Sam froze. This was the second time in the session he reacted abnormally. He said, "No, I worked alone," but his breathing quickened, and he had lost the initial calm. From the observation room, the expert assessed Sam's behavior, not only reflected personal concealment, but also hinted at the possibility of a second party in the chain of events. His slip of "we," his avoidance of the vacant lot question, and his overreaction when the non-standard route was mentioned, made the police start asking, was Sam the only one who stalked Kara, or was he merely the first visible link in a more complex pattern? This led the special case team to pursue a parallel investigation, continue applying pressure on Sam while expanding the search for anyone who worked the same shift with him, shared a vehicle, or lived near Sam at the time Kara disappeared. The interrogation session ended in heavy silence. Sam left the room, but the investigators stayed another hour to analyze every inconsistency he had revealed. Sam denied everything, but his denials were inconsistent, illogical, and filled with linguistic slips. Most importantly, he could not provide a reasonable explanation for the 38 missing minutes, and he could not explain why his DNA appeared on the handkerchief recovered from the scene. For the first time in 30 years, the Springfield police did not just have evidence, they had motive, behavior, and contradictory statements from the primary suspect. And the lead investigator issued a firm internal conclusion: Sam is not telling the full truth. The only thing still missing is finding out who, or what, he is trying to hide. Right after the interrogation session full of contradictions, and especially Sam's linguistic slip of "we," the special case team decided they could no longer treat Sam as a lone suspect. If Sam deliberately dodged questions about the vacant lot, if he reacted strongly when asked whether anyone else was on the night shift with him, and if his behavioral mode resembled that of a long-term planner, then it was highly possible he did not act alone. To test this hypothesis, the investigative team returned to Crown Valley Logistics' 1994 personnel records and reviewed the entire list of night shift delivery drivers, those who could have been near Park Central Square on the evening Kara disappeared. Among more than 30 names, only one name appeared alongside Sam more frequently than anyone else: Rita Coleman, a delivery worker who started in 1993, born in 1972, who often worked night shifts, and according to internal records, had shared delivery routes with Sam for at least 7 consecutive shifts before Kara disappeared. This immediately drew the investigative team's attention, because the model of only one person knowing the route and timing was no longer certain. If Rita also knew Kara's nightly route, or if she had ever ridden with Sam, then the likelihood she knew something important was very high. When the investigative team tracked down Rita's residency records to interview her, they uncovered an unexpected fact: Rita had gone missing in 2001. Her family reported her missing after 3 weeks of no contact, but because Rita lived independently, had freelance work, no children, and frequently moved between Missouri and Arkansas, police at the time classified it as a voluntary departure from residence case. Rita's missing person file was opened but never developed. No leads, no evidence, no signs of crime. The disappearance faded into obscurity within months. But for the Kara Hollis special case team, it was no longer random. A veteran investigator recalled the observation from the interrogation: Sam reacted as if he was afraid we would mention someone else. When cross-referencing the data with the 1994 delivery log system, they found 2 key details. Rita Coleman had made deliveries in the same area as Sam during the week Kara disappeared, and in at least 2 instances, the log showed Sam and Rita arriving at delivery points less than 3 minutes apart, a short enough interval that it could only be explained in 2 ways: either they traveled in the same vehicle, or they were surveilling the same target. Police began asking a question no one had ever asked before: what did Rita know about Sam? Digging deeper into Rita's background, they discovered that in the company's personnel file, Rita had submitted a request to change delivery routes because she felt uncomfortable working night shifts. The request was written in early 1995, just months after Kara disappeared, and was denied due to staffing shortages. This was a red flag in the legal sense: a night shift worker requesting a route change right after a disappearance occurred in the area they had passed through. But what sent chills down their spines was not the route change request, but Rita's disappearance in 2001. In the 2001 missing person file, there was one short sentence that went unnoticed at the time. Rita once mentioned to her roommate that she was worried about an old man coming to find her. No further description, no name, no license plate, no clear relationship, but when placed next to Sam Whitmore's file, the special case team understood this could be the overlooked piece missing for 24 years. Keep in mind, in 2001, Sam was still living in Springfield. He was still working as a delivery driver, and he was still appearing within a movement radius that overlapped the area where Rita was last seen. A highly dangerous hypothesis began to take shape. Rita Coleman may have been a witness or an accomplice in the Kara Hollis case, and Sam may have eliminated Rita to silence her. If true, the Kara Hollis case was no longer just a single abduction, but part of a prolonged pattern of behavior that could involve multiple victims no one knew about. The behavioral analysis team re-examined every report from 1994 to 2001 and found a chilling similarity. Rita and Sam were present in the same areas during many night shifts. Sam often took extra shifts, Rita often requested fewer. Rita was noted as anxious, Sam was noted as quiet, reserved. Two opposite personalities, but fitting the pattern of perpetrator, unwilling witness. One investigator proposed if Rita witnessed the event on the night Kara disappeared, or if she had joined Sam in surveilling the victim, she could have become a risk to Sam in the years that followed. That risk may have been the reason Rita vanished without a trace. When the special case team presented this analysis to command, a cold conclusion was recorded in the report. The investigative direction regarding Rita Coleman opens the possibility that Sam did not act alone and may have eliminated someone who knew the secret. This was the most dangerous expansion of the investigation because it not only sought the truth behind Kara Hollis, but could also lead to a second case that had lain in darkness for 24 years. And if Sam was willing to eliminate someone who once shared delivery routes with him, an even more terrifying question began to emerge. How many other people had passed through Sam's life and were never seen again? As soon as Sam Whitmore's behavioral profile was complete, the DNA from the 30-year lost handkerchief directly matched Sam, the hair in Kara's car reinforced the biological trace, and the accomplice hypothesis through Rita Coleman's case made the risk of Sam continuing to erase evidence far too great. The special case team decided the time to act had arrived. On the morning of March 12, 2025, the Greene County prosecutor signed the official arrest warrant for Sam Whitmore, backed by 3 pieces of legal evidence, stronger than anything the case had ever had: direct DNA evidence, the unexplained 38-minute timeline gap, and behavioral evidence from the search of Sam's home. The warrant targeted not only Sam inside the house, but also authorized a full search of every vehicle he owned, including an old gray pickup truck, the vehicle the special case team suspected Sam had used in place of the silver pickup from 1994. The special arrest team approached Sam's house at 6:45 a.m., a time when residents were rarely outside, and Sam usually left for work. As Sam opened the garage door to start his vehicle, 3 agents moved in from both sides, read the warrant, and ordered him to raise his hands. Sam's eyes widened, he seemed confused for a few seconds, then stepped back, just the moment when an investigator spotted something that further convinced them they had acted at the right time. In the bed of Sam's pickup truck was a small wooden box, lid slightly ajar, revealing a collection of women's items. The wooden box was immediately sealed under the vehicle search warrant. Sam was handcuffed right in front of his house. He did not resist strongly, but kept repeating, "I don't understand what's happening, I didn't do anything wrong." The investigators did not respond, because they knew that phrase was only the first step for most suspects in decades-old cases. When the forensics team opened the wooden box inside the garage, the first discovery made the air in the room feel suffocating. Inside the box were numerous women's keepsakes, name tags, hair ties, wallet photos, old movie tickets, a single earring, even a piece of fabric, similar to the type once found in Kara's car. But the item that left every investigator frozen, the item that turned the entire case from suspicion to certainty, was a small silver ring lying at the bottom of the box. The ring was engraved with the initials KH inside, an item Kara's mother had described nearly 31 years earlier. "My girl wore that ring every day, she never took it off." When the ring was examined under magnification, the description matched perfectly. There was no longer any doubt, this was Kara Hollis's ring, the first personal item of the victim to surface since the night she disappeared in 1994. The ring was placed in a special evidence bag, and triple sealed. One investigator whispered, "No one keeps something like this unless they took it from Kara." Those words nailed the entire file shut. In abduction investigations, trophies carry exceptional legal weight, because the offender keeps them to relive the sense of possession, and Sam had kept that ring for 3 decades. While forensics continued examining the truck, Sam was led to the patrol car. Neighbors stood on their porches watching in extreme bewilderment. Springfield was not an overly large community, and Sam, the quiet man who lived alone, shopped regularly at the nearby supermarket, sometimes helped neighbors trim hedges, was not the type anyone had ever looked at with suspicion. A woman said in a trembling voice, "Sam couldn't have done this, he's so gentle." Another shook his head in disbelief. "We've known him for over 20 years, never seen him treat anyone badly." But that was precisely what shocked the community the most. Long-term stalkers very rarely have prior records, very rarely cause public disturbances, and almost always blend into the community as ordinary people. As Sam was placed in the patrol car, a behavioral investigator observed his face. Sam did not cry, did not get angry, did not confess, and did not accuse anyone else. He simply stared down at his cuffed wrists, as if he still did not understand why everything had finally collapsed. That was the classic expression of someone who had controlled a secret for so long that he believed it would never be uncovered. But DNA does not forget. Evidence does not forget. Small mistakes do not forget. After Sam was transported to headquarters, the forensics team continued checking every corner of the pickup truck. Several long hairs were found in the passenger seat gap. They could not yet be identified, but they were collected immediately for analysis. A small folded piece of paper with barely legible notes, apparently rote reminders from the 1990s, was also placed in a sealed bag, and beneath the floor mat, they found gravel residue, whose mineral composition matched the mud sample found under the mat in Kara's car 30 years earlier. Those details did not change the core of the case, but they made the entire picture so sharp that no room remained for an innocent explanation. When the news spread, Springfield fell into genuine shock. Social media exploded with 2 streams of emotion. One side felt relief that after 31 years, the Kara Hollis case finally had an answer. The other felt horror because the perpetrator, if the court confirmed it, had lived among them, bought coffee with them, greeted them every morning. A man at the local supermarket recounted, "I used to talk to Sam about the weather. I can't believe I was talking to a..." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Sam's normalcy was exactly what made the community feel more uneasy than ever before. As the patrol car drove Sam away from the neighborhood, a young investigator said quietly to his colleague, "There's no turning back now. This will be Springfield's historic case." And it was exactly that. The arrest warrant for Sam Whitmore not only marked the biggest turning point in the investigation, but also the moment the entire city had to confront its darkest memory. Sometimes the truth lives right next door, and 30 years of silence does not make it disappear. It only makes it deeper. The trial of Sam Whitmore opened in November 2025, nearly filling the entire Greene County courtroom, where from early morning Springfield residents had lined up to attend the case they once thought would never have an ending. The prosecutor stood before the jury, and began not with emotion, but with a carefully prepared structure. 21 forensic pieces of evidence and timeline items, numbered from 1 to 21, arranged chronologically from the day Kara Hollis disappeared in 1994, to the moment Sam was arrested. They presented the 30-year lost handkerchief containing DNA matching Sam, the hair sample from Kara's car with a partial profile, consistent with the Whitmore family line. The 1994 map, marked with Kara's usual route, the delivery log with the inexplicable 38-minute gap, the linguistic slip of "we" during interrogation, the wooden box containing women's keepsakes, and finally, the silver ring engraved with KH, described as evidence that could not exist in anyone's possession, except the perpetrator's. Each piece of evidence was presented with detailed forensic analysis, the mineral content of the mud matching the vacant lot, the conclusion about the time Sam deviated from the standard delivery route, the behavioral analysis, according to the stalking offender model, and the full GIS algorithmic logic, showing Sam had exactly enough time to carry out the approach, isolation, movement of Kara within the precise 38-minute gap. The jury sat in silence as the prosecution displayed a three-dimensional model reconstructing Sam's movement route, minute by minute, using accurate 1994 data. The prosecutor concluded the presentation with a clear, cold statement: if it wasn't Sam Whitmore, then there would have to be someone with Sam's DNA, in Sam's vehicle, with Sam's map, and keeping Kara's keepsake in Sam's box. Such a person does not exist. When it was the defense's turn, the attorney stood, adjusted the microphone, and spoke the words any trial involving a missing person with no body must face: there is no body. He looked directly at the jury and emphasized, there is no evidence Kara Hollis is dead. There is no evidence Kara was attacked by Sam. There is no camera footage, no direct eyewitness, no signs of struggle in the car, and not a single physical piece of evidence indicating the time of death. The defense argued that everything the prosecution presented was merely a chain of inference, not proven fact, and that Sam keeping the ring could have another explanation, though he did not specify what that explanation was. The defense tried to undermine the forensic strength by focusing on the gaps. What if Kara is still alive? What if the handkerchief was just something Sam picked up? What if the hair belonged to someone else? These questions were not meant to reveal truth, but to plant doubt, the proper function of the defense. During rebuttal, the prosecution called a forensic expert who specialized in reconstructing death scenarios, someone who had worked on more than 300 no-body cases. He took the stand, displayed simulations of possible approaches to Kara at Park Central Square, explaining how an offender could subdue an adult victim in just 7 to 10 seconds if attacking from behind. He described how the absence of a body was not proof Kara was alive, but rather a possible outcome when the perpetrator had time and favorable terrain to dispose of remains, especially in a case from 1994, before widespread surveillance technology. He explained why the nylon rope and root notes found at Sam's home fit the preparation model for abduction, and why Kara's ring appearing in the wooden box could not be accidental. When the defense asked, "Can you say 100% that Kara is dead?" the expert replied, "In forensic science, 100% is rare, but when 21 pieces of evidence all point in the same direction, it is no longer speculation. That is the only logically consistent model." Throughout the trial, Sam remained silent. He showed no reaction when Kara's ring was held up, no reaction when the map was presented, no reaction when the prosecution displayed the GIS simulation of his 1994 route. Sam simply looked down, hands clasped together, sometimes resting his face on his shoulder, sometimes staring at the wall, as if trying to escape the room. His attorney repeatedly urged him to testify in his own defense, but Sam refused. "I don't remember, I don't want to say something wrong." That silence did not reduce suspicion, it amplified it, because an innocent person typically argues every detail, while Sam did not. The trial lasted 11 days, and when both prosecution and defense had finished presenting, the case went to the jury. One might have thought that with such overwhelming forensic evidence, a verdict would come quickly, but deliberations lasted longer than expected. Some jurors were fully convinced by the DNA and the ring, others remained haunted by the defense's refrain, "There is no body." One said, "I know the logic points to Sam, but I'm afraid of convicting someone when we're not certain Kara is dead." Another replied, "No one disappears for 31 years without leaving a trace. No one keeps a missing person's ring without a reason." The tension between emotion and legal evidence made the deliberation room feel taut as a wire at times. While Springfield waited, media camped outside the courthouse all day, public opinion divided, and Kara's family sat in silence, because for them, the trial was not about punishing Sam, but about ending 31 years of not knowing where Kara was, whether alive or dead. As the jury entered the final stage of deliberation, one thing everyone understood: the Kara Hollis case was no longer the story of one missing person. It had become a test of the entire legal system for nobody cases, where logical evidence must substitute for the absence of remains. And now, only one question hung in the air above the courtroom ceiling: would 21 pieces of forensic evidence be strong enough to convict Sam Whitmore, or would Springfield have to face another kind of pain, the perpetrator standing right in front of them but not convicted? When the jury returned to the courtroom after nearly 2 days of closed deliberations, the atmosphere inside was so thick with tension that even the smallest sounds felt jarringly loud. The foreperson stood up, hands trembling slightly, and read the verdict: guilty on all counts. Sam Whitmore did not bow his head, did not react. He simply blinked once, and then remained silent, his expression so detached it was chilling. The judge sentenced him to 40 years without parole, emphasizing, even without a body, the forensic evidence, behavioral evidence, and timeline presented at trial have met the standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. In the gallery, Kara's family held hands tightly, not crying, only exhaling, a breath not of relief, but of the feeling that a chapter stretching across 3 decades had finally been closed. Outside the courthouse, the people of Springfield stood stunned. A man whispered, 31 years, and the killer was living right next to us. Not everyone accepted that truth. Some neighbors continued to believe Sam was innocent, not because the evidence was weak, but because they did not want to believe evil could hide behind the everyday face they had grown so familiar with. Nevertheless, the 40-year sentence was regarded as a historic turning point for the Missouri justice system. Immediately after the trial, the Springfield Police Department began a comprehensive overhaul of its evidence management system, seen as one of the biggest weaknesses that prolonged the Kara case for over 30 years. The handkerchief that had been misfiled became a symbol of the urgent need for modern preservation protocols. The department implemented an electronic barcode system, replaced old forensic freezers with new ones, and reinventoried all evidence from the 80s and 90s to the highest scientific standards. A young officer said on local television, if that handkerchief hadn't been lost, the case could have been solved as early as 2005. This is a lesson we will never allow to repeat. Even the Missouri State Justice Commission used the Kara case as an example to request funding for statewide evidence storage upgrades. On a national scale, the Kara Hollis case quickly became a model for solving no-body homicides, discussed at major forensic conferences, and incorporated into curricula at many police academies. The investigative structure, forensic next-generation DNA, genealogy, behavioral analysis, time and place GIS, and unconscious language-based interrogation techniques, was regarded as the gold standard for similar cases. A forensic professor from Virginia commented, "The Kara case was a turning point. It proved that no body does not mean no justice." Many states began adopting the Springfield-style genetic genealogy analysis model, in which partial DNA profiles are treated as strategic assets for tracing distant relatives, people who unintentionally provide leads for cases long thought buried forever. Mud mineral analysis, once overlooked, now became a required subject, because the very mud sample under the mat in Kara's car had led the investigation back to the correct vacant lot after 30 years. Legal analysis in journals called the Kara Hollis case the cold case that rewrote the rules, the cold case that forced the entire field to rewrite investigative standards. But in reality, the greatest impact was not in the courtroom or in academic conference rooms. It lay in the final message drawn from the case: cold cases can still be solved when science catches up to the secrets the perpetrator left behind. Without 2025 DNA technology, the handkerchief would have remained an anonymous object forever. Without genealogy, the name Whitmore would have stayed lost in a sea of data. Without GIS, Sam's 38-minute gap would have remained an unexplainable dark spot. Technology does not just decode what the human eye missed, It allows time to reverse, reconstructing the moment of the crime that occurred long ago. And so, the Kara Hollis case became the most powerful proof of a truth that every family with a missing loved one clings to. No case ever truly ends. No secret stays safe forever. Science will reach it, whether in 5 years, 20 years or 31 years, but it will reach it. As Springfield gradually quieted after the shock, Kara's name received one small additional line beneath it on the victim's memorial in the Central Park: justice after 31 years. And for this community, as well as for investigators nationwide, that case will forever be remembered as a reminder that time does not cover up crime. It only makes the truth, when finally uncovered, ring out even louder. Looking back at the story of the Kara Hollis case after 31 years buried in darkness, Americans today can draw many practical lessons, not just from the journey of solving it, but from the gaps the case exposed. The handkerchief misfiled in evidence storage for 3 decades is a stark reminder that in America, no matter how modern the justice system is, small procedural errors can delay justice for decades. It urges communities, agencies, and individuals to value precision and accountability in every step of their work. The 38 missing minutes in the delivery log show that crime is not always complex. Sometimes it is just a small window of time overlooked. This reminds Americans today that keeping personal travel records, using GPS, sharing locations with loved ones, tracking routes during late-night shifts, is not just a convenience, it is an important safety measure. The silver KH ring found in Sam's keepsake box underscores a painful truth: many offenders show no outward signs. They can live quietly among the community, go to work normally, chat with neighbors. So the lesson for modern American society is not to judge safety based only on someone's appearance. Instead, trust your own instincts and report unusual behavior, no matter how minor. Finally, the fact that modern DNA and genealogy technology could solve a no-body case sends a message of hope in a vast America where many families carry the pain of loved ones missing without trace. The truth may arrive late, but it does not vanish. Science can be the bridge that brings justice back, as long as we never stop believing, never stop remembering, and never stop demanding transparency from the system that protects us. Thank you for joining us on this journey to reclaim justice after 31 years. If you found this story meaningful, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next cases solved through the power of science and persistence. See you in the next video, where we continue to explore how truth always finds its way back, no matter how long it has been buried.